To my RoboFun audience, I am Laura Hart, and I am here with my colleague, Cynthia Solomon. How are you today, Cynthia?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's a beautiful sunny day in New York. So I had a good night's sleep, and that's all that it takes to set up the day. So, for those of you joining who may not know about RoboFun, we provide children with creative ways to develop a love for learning by building robots, by learning how to code, by making stop motion animations, and by using Minecraft in creative ways to learn about electrical engineering. We're located in New York City on 102nd and Broadway, and we have classes all the time. If you go to robofun.org, you can learn all about it. We have some classes coming up next Monday for MLK Day that are not yet filled. And filled for us is tiny, especially during a pandemic. Tiny meaning 4 or 6 kids in a class. And they're big, huge classes. We take the pandemic very seriously and safety very seriously of your children. So we're here today with an amazing, special person. And Cynthia, as I describe things, whatever I get wrong, please correct me, because it's easy to get some of these things wrong. Cynthia was part of the original team of people who developed the programming language Logo. And for those of you who may not know Logo became, or generations later, is what kids and adults use called Scratch. And so Logo was a real fundamental piece in the ed tech world. And it was developed in the 60s and 70s. And I am just so happy that Cynthia's here to tell us about that journey. So how did you get involved in it? And I also just want to remind our audience, we love questions. So feel free to jump in and ask us questions as we're going. So how did you get involved in all of this? You were a young woman at this point, graduated from Radcliffe in '59, and this all started in the 60s, right?
Yes, in the mid 60s. But in 1962, I wanted to learn to program, and there weren't very many opportunities. And a friend of mine suggested that I become a secretary. So I did. I became Marvin Minsky, secretary at MIT. Marvin was running an incredible group of people. It was the artificial intelligence group. It later became a lab. And it was the home of Lisp and thinking about making machines intelligent. So that's where I joined. And Seymour joined Marvin a couple
So for those of you who might not know, Seymour Papert is who Cynthia is talking about. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Well, Seymour Papert is the source for giving children their own programming language. And he had spent 5 years working with Jean Piaget in Geneva, Switzerland, where the focus was on how children think. Mm-hmm. And so he was well prepared to think about how making machines intelligent and children's intelligence and how to learn from one another. And at the time, anyway, he joined in Marvin and started working. He started consulting at a company called Bolt, Beranek and Newman.
Now we're talking about 66, about?
Now known as BBN.
Yep.
And he started consulting there around 65, 66 for an ex-student of Marvin's and Seymour's, Danny Barbro, who was then head of the artificial intelligence group at BBN, and Wally Feuerzig, who was head of the educational technology group at BBN. BBN was started as an acoustic company, but became a forefront research lab for computing. The sort of, whether it was the first or second time-sharing system, partially designed by John McCarthy, was at BBN, and so on. It became very well known in that area. And so Seymour started consulting there. I had left MIT. Marvin got me a job at the MITRE Corporation, where I learned to program in Fortran. Before leaving MIT, the MIT hackers and students taught me three things. They taught me how to play chess, they taught me how to play bridge, and they taught me Lisp. And so after Seymour got to this consulting gig at MIT, Wally had an opening, and I joined Wally's group as a Lisp programmer. And I worked on some Lisp stuff while Seymour worked on, Wally had a project going with 5 different classrooms. 3 of them were students learning algebra. And they were using a programming language which was similar to BASIC. Oh, by the way, BASIC was just popping out at the time. But unlike BASIC, it was interpretive. BASIC is an interpreter now, but not then. You had to compile. And Seymour, I just, in his words, resonate that it was totally absurd for children, young people, to learn algebra by using an algebraic programming language. So that's when he really focused in on creating a language for children, for young people. And Danny and Wally too, and I all had a Lisp background, and so did Seymour. So the language was going to be procedural. It was going to, Seymour would say, what are the things that young people play with? Well, he said, words and sentences. So the first focus of Logo was on words and sentences.
Interesting.
And it later became a full-blown Lisp processing language. But the important thing was it was procedural. Recursion was a major part of the language, which, and another key element was that you could give things names that could be very long. You didn't have to say X is a number. You could say, my favorite number is, and that's fine. And that was very important to us. And it was always important in the early days of Logo that there wasn't a restriction on words, either words for procedures or words. We didn't talk about variables. We talked about things. Things had names.
And this was to make it less math and sciencey and more.
Well, here's one of the reason that Seymour would give is that variable had too many meanings.
I see.
That it who knew what you were talking about? And we were trying to think of in terms of a meta language, a way of talking about what you're doing that would make it easily accessible for novices.
I see.
So anyway, in the summer of 1966, Seymour presented to us, Danny, Wally, me, and a ex-MIT math graduate named Dick Grant, presented to us the specs for logo. And Dan got really excited and started coding right away in Lisp. And in fact, I took over for a while, and then Dick took over from me. So by the summer of 1967, we had a first version of logo in Lisp running on a SDS 940. And that summer, Seymour taught some 10-year-olds at a school on the Hanscom Air Force Base. And Wally and I were voyeurs.
Okay. Okay.
And Seymour and I spent lots and lots of time discussing what went over with the young people and what didn't, because we drove back and forth together.
You know what? I had those same rides in Maine with Seymour. I guess maybe 40
He
years
was
later.
lucky to have both of us, I tell you that, because so much of his work was based on those conversations.
Yeah, it really was. We would drive from Deer Isle, Maine to work with kids in Bucksport, Maine. And we also shared a love of food. And there was a really good fried scallop place. And so on the way home, we often had to stop for that.
We always hoped, we never did, but it would have been a wonderful thing to do a logo class with food. Because as you know, Seymour was a great cook.
Right.
And recipes and debugging the food so fit in with programming, or as we say today, coding.
Right, right. So really a huge thrust, I mean, I always sensed this, but was to make the coding or the programming environment a human environment that didn't.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Okay. And we continually we looked for things to do that were procedural, mm-hmm. or that you could articulate, and physical skills. And with that, let me finish with.
Sure, I'm sorry.
68, no, I'm going to tell you the whole story. In 68, 69, a whole new version of logo. Every time we did anything with logo, it was followed by a total revamping of the language. It needed it, but it was also exciting and important to do.
It sounds like good teaching. Every time you teach a lesson, you learn what doesn't work, and you sometimes throw the whole thing out or parts.
That's exactly so.
Right.
That we had the capability to throw everything out, mm-hmm. and new programmers came along that were faster and better at coding than, mm-hmm. and they could put together. So BBN had this PDP-1, this digital equipment. It was the first time shared machine, right? That wasn't doing anything. So we were given it, and it became a dedicated time shared logo system. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in the school year 68, 69, NSF gave funding to Wally to do this experiment with 7th graders at a junior high. In those days, it was a junior high school in Lexington, mm-hmm. called Muzzy Junior High School. Seymour and I put together a paper, which is on my website, I think, called something about the Muzzy experiment.
And what is your website? So people.
Oh, heavens.
But that's okay. You keep talking. I'll look it up.
It's logothings.github.
Oh, yeah. I got that. Okay.
It's very ugly because I gave up. The place I had it was Workspaces, and it closed. And this friend of mine, Walter Bender, stuck all my stuff on GitHub, and I've never I've never done anything with it since. But it's a repository. It's an ugly repository with very interesting information. Anyway, Seymour and I were not going to be the teachers. Uh,
Okay, so now this is 68, 69.
yeah.
Okay, before you go into that story, I just have a question.
Oh,
Did
sure.
you guys like know you were on the edge of something that really transformed children's education?
Well, see, the early 60s was full of hope, energy for revolutionizing school.
Well, 68, 69 was not early. It was late, but still it was very revolutionary.
But that may be true, but not for computers.
Okay. Okay.
It was, as you know, Sputnik, the Russians beat us out. And so there was all this money put into fixing school. So by the mid 60s, there were versions of fixes.
Mm-hmm.
And there were attitude changes.
Mm-hmm.
It was the beginning of getting away from teachers being superior and standing in the front of the room and lecturing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course,
mm-hmm.
that became a much more fashionable in the 70s, but the roots were there in the 80s, in the 60s. The 60s were very, very exciting. There was a revolution everywhere. There was, civil rights. Harvard Square, for instance, was rampant with revolution, and every university, every campus. So
did you have a sense like you're
yes,
developing? You did.
Absolutely. We were part of this movement that we were going to change big time how school was. Well, Seymour felt that school was a terrible place and that it would fold, it would collapse. But we were interested in education, in learning, and we were going to have whether it was storefronts, I mean, everything. It was so exciting. Oh, yes.
What about you, Cynthia? That's what Seymour thought. It still hasn't happened.
No, I was part of the team. What I always saw myself as was a craftsperson. I could take these fancy ideas and implement them.
Right. That's exactly what I see myself also.
Okay, we're on the same wavelength.
Right. Right.
But somebody
had to be. That schools were going to disappear?
Seymour was sure they were so bad that they would collapse.
What about you? Did you think that?
Well, I hoped they would. I'm not sure that I saw, I mean, I'm more conservative in that sense. I hoped they would. I hoped that we could make a big dent in how people learned. And I was always interested in learning. You were going to ask me about my child. I spent my childhood with horses. And learning to be a good rider and to be with, you really had to do what I suggest people do with computers, which is to really have a relationship with them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And have a relationship with your bugs and your learning and how you can improve if you wish, or take advantage of not improving. Mm-hmm. But it was that deep learning that takes place.
Where did you grow up with horses?
Well, I grew up in the Boston area.
I see.
But my mother came from New Bedford, Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm. The whaling town.
The whaling town. And that's where I spent summers with my horses.
I see.
And with my grandmother. And my mother's sister started riding again. She was an athlete. She started riding again. So we were paired. It was nice to have a buddy. She just happened to be my aunt.
Okay, so we did a really, the way I always do, wonderful diversion, which always adds so much. So we're now back to 68,
Okay,
69.
so we hired this wonderful math teacher. I was part of the group, so I was part of the interview process, you
Yep.
know.
Yep.
And she had never used computers before, and I took a break from it all. And when I came back a month or so later and visited this classroom, I was very, very disappointed. Neither Seymour nor Wally could express what was wrong, but Cynthia could. And the problem was, because the teacher hadn't had experience programming, she taught syntax instead of thinking about projects.
Mm-hmm.
I was always into projects.
Right.
And so Seymour and I took over. We became team teachers.
Mm-hmm.
He would come to the school 2 times a week, and I came the rest of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought of projects to engage them. My rule eventually, the first project I think we did was Pig Latin, which was okay, wasn't great, but it was okay.
Okay, wait, before we go on, was there a turtle at this point?
No turtle.
Okay, all right, so I'm going to warn
playing
you.
with words and sentences.
Okay, I'm going to warn you in advance that because we only have 8 minutes, there's no way. Wait, no, we're just not going to.
My one rule was, if you play a game on the computer, you have to have written it.
I don't understand. I think we have the same brain, because that was my rule when I was a computer teacher.
Yeah, well, that's why you and Seymour clicked.
Okay, so Cynthia, we're never going to get through everything in 8 minutes, and we're not going to try. And we'll just go as far as we can go, and we'll do another one in a month or two, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope the audience.
It's so,
anyway,
it's so exciting what you're saying, and I don't want to hurry you. Okay, so we're in 68, 69, Pig Latin.
Well, you know, one of the things that people might be interested in is Alan Kay, who was finishing up his doctoral work at Utah, came to visit us. And this was just before he went to Xerox PARC. Some of you may know Alan Kay it had the image of a Dynabook, of what we would now think of as an iPad. Okay, it was that.
I thought he developed the mouse. Do I have that wrong?
No, the person who developed the mouse, I'm blocking his name. He was at Stanford Research.
Okay.
SRI, it's called, Stanford Research Institute, and he's the one that I believe I'm right. He did a lot of things which Alan scooped up.
Right. Okay. So Alan was
really good at finding good ideas and using them. Some people are selfish and find good ideas and don't use them, you know.
Right.
But Alan did, and part of his design for Smalltalk and what you could do with a powerful, dedicated computer, that is, before personal computers were available, Alan was building a personal computer at PARC, and it had to have the capabilities of Logo.
Wow.
So the first visit, he made another visit to us when we did have turtles.
Okay.
But the first version we didn't, but we played with words and sentences. And at the end of the year, I could tell you funny stories, but I won't. I'm going to skip to the end of the year. We had great time with and the young people we worked with were from the average range. We didn't want very smart.
Right.
We wanted to show that this would work with a range of students, and they were incredible. Anyways, but Seymour said, they need something more concrete that they can talk to beside the computer. And that's how
Besides, like, at that point, it would be just a cursor flashing, right?
That's how Turtles came to be. The first Turtles we had, one was on the AI Labs PDP-6, which was a major computer with its 340 display screen. You couldn't portable, that's not portable. And the other was on a floor turtle.
Okay, so for those people whose kids or who may have grown, some of you might have grown up with Logo, with the turtle in the middle of the screen. Some of you might have grown up or are growing up with Scratch, which now has a cat in the middle of the screen. So just to give a little context.
I'd like to introduce, from your introduction, Snap, which is a language initiated by Brian Harvey, who is an Logo person.
Yep.
Who was dissatisfied with the initial versions of Scratch because they weren't you couldn't make a procedure.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a few other things, but that was really critical. And you couldn't do recursive thinking. And so he designed Snap and connected with a Scratch enthusiast named Jens Munnig, who's in Germany. And Jens has become the chief developer of Snap. And Snap has a turtle.
Okay.
Instead of having a cat, it has a pointer. Like the first versions of Logo, the turtle was on the screen was a triangle.
Right, I remember that. Yep.
Okay, well, it's that way in Snap.
Okay.
Okay.
So you get done with the school year, Seymour realizes you need something else.
And so that's when Turtles became. And there was in England a neuroscientist named William Gray Walter. And he had these automatons called Elsie and Elmer. You can look them up on Google and you'll see. And they were tortoises. And that's where the name turtle came from. The Americanized version of tortoise is turtle. Our turtles were always, until I forget till when, tethered.
Right.
And then we had in the middle 70s, we started a company called General Turtle. And it made we also immediately had music as part of the Logo system. And I
remember that in my classroom, because I had to figure out if we were going to use the music, how would we do that with 12 or 15 kids? So I had to buy headphones.
Well, the first music box we had in 1970, it was made by Marvin Minsky. Marvin was a great hacker, tinkerer, and it was a 4-voice music box that was shared amongst all of them. Well, we only had a couple of Is that getting ahead to talk about
Well,
turtles?
we're at the 30 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So I think my last question for you would be okay. Do you have any advice for parents or teachers listening to what we're talking about? Because what you and I care about is giving kids a lifelong love of learning. And I believe if we're on the same page with this, the tool we use is programming. Do you have any advice for parents or teachers on how to
Sign up for your workshops right away. That would be my advice.
That was not planned, everyone.
I'm sorry, but it's I would certainly have a computer at home, but what do you do with it?
Right.
And I think somebody who has some knowledge has to help. And
right.
You have that knowledge and that opening for them.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think it's I would invest in, if I were a parent, I would invest in that.
Thank you for that, Faith. My staff gets mad at me at times because I'll walk through and notice one learner and I'm like, we need to do more for Rafi or for Simon, or they're not quite connecting, and they're like, how can you do that in 5 minutes? It's like, well, when you're with kids for 35 years, you pick it up pretty quick. So,
right. Exactly. Exactly.
So we are going to continue this in probably about a month, and we'll get into the 70s and 80s because we got through the 60s. But we're both big talkers, and that makes it fun.
And I can tell you funny stories about the 60s too.
Well, do you want to end with one funny story, or do you want to wait for next time?
No, next time.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Cynthia. This was so much fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. To our audience, again, Cynthia Solomon, one of the key people who created Logo. And I am Laura Hart, the founder and CEO of RoboFun. We do creative computer classes for kids in programming and robotics and Minecraft and animation at 102nd and Broadway and in over 100 schools in the New York City area. So if you're listening, go to robofun.org and sign up for our mailing list, obviously, if you're listening. And also, if you're like, wow, I want that in my kid's school, just tell us that. And you can also just email me at laura@robofun.org. And have a great day, everybody. Thank you again, Cynthia.
Thank you. Bye-bye.